Okay, listen. So, welcome to the virtual tasting of the Italian Wine Academy. This is, I guess, the third edition now. Rebecca, take it away.
Okay.
I'll shut up now.
Everyone. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. Hopefully, everyone can hear me and see me. So for those of you who are new, this is the English-speaking virtual tasting, where each week we go through a wine using the systematic approach to tasting from WSET, primarily with a focus on the level 2 SAT, but also with some discussion about what the differences would be if you're tasting for the level 3. And also, if I think there's an important point of note, I will also talk about level 4. Because I teach not only for the Italian Wine Academy, but also for the WSET London School at levels 1 to 4 in London. Okay, so let's get started. Thanks to all of my level 2 students from the weekend for coming back after such an intense 2 days of theory to do some tasting together. It's nice to see your faces, and hopefully you've all managed to have a little bit of a rest before we dive in. So to talk a little bit about the wine first, so this is the 2018 Predalupo Roero Arneis by Fontanafredda. Now, the Roero Arneis is a DOCG, granted its DOCG status in 2004, and for Arneis, okay, it has to be a minimum of 95% Arneis. Okay, which is the white grape variety here. So you can use 5% of other grape varieties that are grown locally. But fortunately, Fontanafredda are using 100% Arneis. So it should give us a really good example of both the grape variety and the style within Roero. Okay. So it's 100% Arneis. The DOCG also has a minimum aging requirement of at least 4 months, okay? But it doesn't say how you have to do this. And so for Fontanafredda, they are doing 4 to 5 months aging on the fine lees, yeah? So aging on the yeast. So we should be able to have at least a little bit of detection of that in the wine. They're also, after they've harvested their grapes, 50% of the grapes are kept in contact with the juice for 24 hours. So you have this 24-hour cold soak, this maceration with the skins. So we should also be able to detect a little bit of this, perhaps in the texture of the wine. Okay. The other thing to note about this wine is the vines for Fontanafredda within the Roero for Arneis in particular are planted east to west, okay, which might seem counterintuitive. Okay, most people who are working in cool climates, remember Piedmont in northern Italy is classified as a cool climate for WSET, and most people who are working with white grapes in cool climates are typically trying to plant on south or southeast facing slopes. Okay, you're trying to get the most amount of sun exposure so you have this most amount of ripening this long season. Okay. But actually it's really important not to do that when you're working with Arneis. Okay. It's a grape variety that does not have natural high acidity. It's quite unusual in that sense, where we're so used to the Italian white wines having these very naturally high acidity levels. You know, you think about Cortese, Garganiga, classic northern Italian grapes with high acidity. But because that isn't the case with Arneis, you really need to think about where you're planting in order to maintain the acidity in the wine whilst getting the ripeness in the grape. So it's a really, really fine balance and something that we'll be looking out for when we taste. Okay. So before we taste, the reason I set up the wine like this for you guys and give a little bit of background is because we really want to think about the connection between the theory, so the theory of the grape variety, the climate, the winemaking, and connect it to what we might expect in the glass. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about how the wine is made and where it's from. So let's put that into context as to what we would expect. Okay. So from the grape variety, we'd be thinking to expect low to medium acidity levels. And Arneis in particular has this really floral character. So I'm going to be looking for white flowers. It also doesn't tend to be very citrusy. Doesn't tend to be in the white, the citrus or the kind of green apple pear bracket of your primary flavors. We'll be looking more towards the white stone fruits, so maybe white peach, and also considering almond. One of the classic traits of Arneis is a slight almond character. And because of this, it marries really well with the potential lees aging. Okay, so this has had 5 months on lees. You should just be beginning to see some autolytic character, these yeast characters coming from those dead yeast cells. So we might be getting something creamy coming through. Also, we've had a little bit of skin contact, so we might have a little bit more texture, maybe a little bit more body in the wine. Okay. Remember, both lees, aging, and skin contact will add some texture, some structure, some body to the wine. Okay. So I will ask if you've got any questions, please fire them off in the chat and I will try and approach them whilst we start tasting. But hopefully you've all got wine in your glass and we can have a little taste. So first off, we're going to be looking for the colour. And as I tell most of my level 2 students, you will get very bored with WSET and white wines because it's almost always clear, pale lemon. You're almost always just going to have CPL as your tasting, your appearance note. And that's no difference in this wine. For your level 3, you can put your wines into this bracket of lemon green, but actually I don't think that's the case. This is very clearly lemon to me. Okay. So nice and easy on the appearance, just as we'd expect. Let's have a sniff. And I hope some of you, if you don't have this particular wine, do have an Arneis. So please do share in the chat what you're managing to get from the wine as well. Remember, this is just me telling you what I smell, what I taste. You might be getting different things to me. So, okay. So the intensity of this wine, even though I've had my wine out of the fridge for about 20 minutes, I do like to taste my white wines as close to room temperature as possible. Just because cold suppresses aromas and flavors, so it's easier to taste your wine that way. But even with that, I'm kind of struggling to get a lot of clear flavors from the glass. I'm really having to get my nose into the glass, so it's a light intensity wine. They're definitely there, but I have to get quite a way into the glass. You can see my nose is right in there before I get clear fruit or floral characters. Okay, so the intensity is about getting those clear characteristics. And yeah, for me, it's exactly as I was hoping. It's really, really floral. The first thing that stands out for me on this wine is white flowers. A little bit of peach blossom, apple blossom. Really floral. And this delicate white peach. And this is where using additional descriptors in your tasting note, particularly when you progress to level 3, really helps you, because the fruit in this is not ripe. Okay, I would want to make a clear distinction that whilst I'm getting stone fruit, I'm finding this lovely white peach. It's not ripe. Okay, so I would put unripe white peach. Okay, really helps you kind of visualize your tasting note as a more complete note to help you down the road. There is a very small detection of lees for me on this wine. It's incredibly delicate. It's right at the back of the wine. And it's slightly, to me, it smells a little bit like sour cream, creme fraiche. It's not really bread or pastry. It's more delicate than that. It's just a little kind of creamy. More tips about intensity. Okay, so when you're trying to judge intensity on the nose, it's really about when you can detect what we call the positive flavors or aromas in the wine, okay? So it's not how quickly does the alcohol leap out of the glass, yeah? It's more about when you begin to detect distinct fruit or floral or vegetable or whatever characteristics in the wine, okay? It's not about just smelling the alcohol, okay? So for me, when I'm struggling to pick out clear fruit notes until I have my nose right in the glass, I'll see if I can turn sideways so you can see. So I'm here. This is a light intensity wine, okay? When I get my nose into the glass, I'm touching the glass. That's a light intensity. And that's the point at which, for me, in this wine, I can find that clear floral, that clear peach, and that sour cream. Okay. If I was about a ½ centimeter or a centimeter away, see if this works. So here, so I'm not in, I'm just a little bit above, just a little bit. That's my medium intensity wine, okay? So there should be a gap between my nose and the glass for medium intensity. And the pronounced wines, I'm probably quite a way up here. You won't have problems picking pronounced wines. It's really getting between that kind of light intensity and medium, I think, that most people struggle with their wines. The other thing, if you're struggling with aromas, one of the things I teach in my diploma classes, but will probably be helpful to all of you, is where you put your nose on the glass. Because different chemical compounds from the wine leave the wine at different places. So if you're really struggling to pick up delicate florals, instead of having your nose down here, move your nose to the top of the glass, okay? Here. Because that is where you're going to get all those really delicate aromas from a wine, okay? So you'll get more of the fruit, the heavier compounds at the bottom, more of the lights, the florals, the citrus at the top, okay? The other thing you can do is put your hand over the glass, swirl the glass, bring it to your face, and then take your hand away. Because that's concentrating all the aromas. They've got nowhere to go. And then you get the almond note. Completely changed that wine for me. Just added that lovely kind of bitter almond. So really important to think about how you are smelling and tasting, as well as what you are smelling and tasting. So thank you for the question. That was really helpful. Managed to find my almond. So let's have a taste. Now remember, I like to taste in clusters to really focus your mind, okay? Don't try and do everything at once. Maybe break it down. So I break it down initially into sweetness and acid, because those two things you should be able to balance together, okay? So taste for sweetness and acid. Sometimes at this stage, it's very obvious what the body is. Otherwise, you might want to go back. Normally with body, I would do that, for example, with red, with tannin. Okay. So the wine is dry. You can tell that very quickly, which is what I would expect. And the acidity is medium. It's got real texture to the wine. It's obviously dry, but I don't get that intense mouth watering that I would get from a high acid wine. And I would put this as completely medium down the line, both for level 2 and for level 3, okay? It's not light enough acid to be medium minus for your level 3, because it's still noticeable, it's still there, but I don't get this rush of watering that's going to push me up to medium plus or high. Okay. I'm going to taste again for my alcohol and my body. If you're struggling with the detection of body in your wine, and you're so used to naturally just pulling the air through your mouth, because we train you to try and get this air flow through your mouth to help you with alcohol, to help you with flavors. But if you're struggling with body, hold the wine in your mouth for a couple of seconds. Okay? That really gives me an idea of what the weight, the body, and the texture of the wine is. That also helps with the alcohol, because you're letting it sit on your palate a little bit. So you're beginning to get your palate acclimatized to the alcohol beyond the acidity, for example. So medium alcohol, and actually medium bodied. And again, with both level 2 and level 3, this is right in the middle of that body. Okay? It hasn't got enough texture. It's not rich enough in my mouth to push it up to that medium plus bracket on level 3. Okay? But it's definitely got a distinct texture. And actually, for those of you who've studied with VIA or are thinking about studying your diploma, it would be helpful if you can find that texture to make a note of it in your tasting note. Okay, because I would make a note to say that this has a little bit of phenolic grip. Yeah, it's got a little bit of texture. I can feel that there's been some skin contact there. I can feel that the lees has really rounded it out. And I think that's very important for this wine, and therefore I would make a note of it. And those of you who are level 3 thinking about level 4, beginning to get into this good practice, this good habit of making comments on other aspects of the wines to help you with it, you know, it's just a good trait to get into. Okay. So finally, let's taste for flavor, intensity, characteristics. And then if you're able to, at the end, try and see if you can do the finish. And I always like, you can see, I always like to go back and have another smell before I taste, because remember, the two are connected. And this is where this wine really shines for me. The intensity, the flavor intensity on the palate, whilst it was light on the nose, it's medium on the palate, okay? And if I was working for level 3, it would be medium plus. There is a lot of intensity on the palate of this wine. You've got a huge amount of concentration of those flavors, okay? And it begins to round itself out. Whilst the nose was incredibly delicate, here is where I find the kind of citrus. But I think it's really important to put your citrus into different categories, okay? Because some citrus is sharper than others, okay? You think about the difference between an unripe lemon and a ripe orange, yeah? The sharpness, the flavors are very different there. So always try and really tightly categorize your citrus if you can. And for me, on the palate, as well as that lovely white peach, which on the palate is much riper, okay, I get this orange flavor, yeah, this kind of soft, gentle navel orange coming through, that again, balanced with that slightly sour cream, those floral characters. I think it really, really shines in the intensity on the palate. And with that, I'm still tasting the peach. So it's got a long finish, this wine. And remember, finish is not how long the alcohol takes to leave your mouth. Finish is similar to intensity, and in that it is about the positive characteristics from the wine, okay? The aromas, the flavors. And here, the peach character is incredibly persistent. I get peach for a very long time, so it's got this lovely long finish. Okay. So when I'm beginning to think about my quality, okay, remember we tend to teach with this Blick scale, balance, length, intensity, complexity. Okay. So this wine is well balanced. Okay. It has length. It certainly has some intensity, and much more intensity on the palate than the nose. So it kind of leaves you with its sense of intensity. And it has some complexity. There's not huge amounts going on in this wine, but we do have floral. We do have a little bit of citrus on the palate. We do have stone fruit. I'm getting a little bit of that lees, that almondy character. So using the Blick scale for me, this is a very good wine. And remember, if you're working on level 3 to level 4, you need to give some reasoning. And the reason it's not outstanding for me is that I would like a little bit more intensity on the nose. If it had that little bit more intensity and ever so slight complexity, that it would just nudge it up a little bit. And this is where the Blick scale is obviously a guideline, and where having these other things like commentary on texture, this disconnect a little bit between the nose and the palate, having notes about those kind of things in your tasting note will really help you with your quality conclusions. Okay? So a very good wine. Drink now, not suitable for further aging if you are working for level 3 or level 4, okay? Because this wine doesn't have the acidity level that you would want, and it's not going to gain anything, okay? We've got mostly a focus on these primary flavor characteristics, yeah? And a little bit of secondary, so a little bit of lees, but it's not going to develop. It's not going to get better if you leave it. You know, you're going to lose all that lovely floral aromatic that makes the nose of this wine so light, so pretty. Okay, so that's our Roero Arneis for this week. I have to admit, I do absolutely love this wine, as Jacopo knows, not least because Arneis is the grape variety named for being a little rascal, which used to be my nickname when I worked in the wine trade, because for those of you who can't see me, I'm incredibly short and very annoying when I'm working on a shop floor. So this became my wine of choice, and I think this is a fabulous example of how you can take that, that propensity, that tendency towards lesser acidity, and really use it to a wine's advantage. You know, really round out that palate, give it that texture, take some lees to it and develop the flavors. I think this really demonstrates how great Arneis can be, particularly in this area. Okay, let's have a look. So someone okay. So we've had someone saying good, not very good. This is where partly your argument comes into play. For me, it's because when you do the approach using level 3, and I meant to mention this earlier, when you have more of that nuance that the level 3 systematic approach allows you, that more detail, actually, because it's medium plus intensity on the palate, you're just adding this little bit more because you have got a little bit more flavor. That's, for me, what pushes it up that bracket. Because with the level 3, you do have a little bit more ability to demonstrate that nuance of the wine. I hope, Luca, that answers the question for me, why it manages to be in this very good bracket. Yeah, because we have got that little bit more intensity, we have got that length, we are seeing both primary and secondary characteristics, that little bit of complexity. In terms of the question about mineral notes, for me, it's not something I notice in this wine. I associate minerality, particularly with an aroma of wet stone or flint or graphite. And I don't find that in this wine. However, they are on clay calcareous soils. So if you detect that, then great, make sure you have a note of it in your tasting note. But for me, I don't pick that up, but that's me, not you. I don't know if there are any other questions. Yeah, the note about smelling honey, for me, I think that is expressed a little bit in sort of acacia flower or honeysuckle. Perhaps that's how you're getting that honey note, that kind of floral honey. I tend to associate honey as a characteristic of aging, of that concentration in the wine. So I tend to avoid it unless it's incredibly strong from the grape, and search out whether or not it's actually coming from the flowers, which for me in this case it is. But again, because I can't smell what you smell, I never like to rule out someone else's smell, because perhaps what I smell as honeysuckle, you smell as honey. Stevie, how was your wine?
My wine was great. I think my wine's better than yours, to be quite honest, but
Stevie admitted to me just before we started that she was going to taste something completely different.
Well, I didn't have any Arneis. How many of you had Arneis? Raise your hands.
Ooh.
Oh, wow, that's quite a few, actually. I'm impressed.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you guys get bonus points. I mean, as you can understand, the purpose of this tasting, the practice tasting, is not, it's really to get you the lingo going for the WSET specifically, right? So I think we have a great advantage having Rebecca, because this is her specialty, right? Grading papers mostly, right? So for those of you who are doing WSET 2 or have done also level 3, it's about how to also excel in the exam, but you can have those skill sets so that will remain forever. It's kind of that. So we want to give the much practice as possible and put you up at the same page, on the same page. I know some of you have done the first online course. Thank you very much for having participated in that. So, right. Happy holidays, everyone. Happy Easter. Take care. Buona Pasqua.
Thanks.
Ciao,
Pasqua.
ragazzi.